Welcome back to the Shema podcast, my friends. I have a incredible episode lined up, an amazing guest coming on, Rabbi Raphael Shore. And we're going to be talking a bit about anti-Semitism. And I'll tell you, this is something we've discussed before. And I've always explained it as that it's something very irrational because it doesn't follow the rules set forth in sociology. Over history, when nations would conquer another nation, the way to unify the acquired nation under the other nation was to get the inhabitants of that acquired nation to assimilate into its culture. And even today, when I'm analyzing stocks and you hear about a company that's acquiring another company, one of the questions that comes up quite a bit is, will their cultures align? Will the culture of the acquired company be able to assimilate into the culture of the larger company? But when it comes to the Jewish people, the more we have ever tried to assimilate, the more the other nations have killed us and pushed us out. And I've always explained that as being irrational. However, a few years ago, a friend of mine in the community, who is a psychologist as his profession, said something to me in regards to keeping peace in the home, but it stuck with me. And he said, Dan, there is no such thing as irrational behavior. What your responsibility is as a husband and a father and a friend is to understand the other person's logic for their behavior. That's how you get to know someone. And I have learned recently that anti-Semitism is not irrational. It's totally rational, not irrational. And this first came to my senses when we had Rabbi Ken Spiro out here to speak a few weeks ago. And in his presentation, one of the lines that blew me away was the verse to a song that the Nazi youth would sing. And one of the lines from that song are, "We are free from the mountain of Sinai, you leave us alone." And after the speech, Rabbi Ari Wolbe, he asked me to get up and speak to explain to those there for the first time what the purpose of Torch is. And I found it very easy. And I said, the purpose of Torch is to teach Jews what I now am aware that Hitler knew, that we received the Torah at Mount Sinai, and for the Jewish people to teach it to their children as the Nazis did to their children. That evening, I sat on my back porch and found something else I have in common with Rabbi Spiro. Not only do we have a love for the Jewish people and love for Torah, but we also have a love for a nice glass of bourbon and a good cigar. And we were chatting. And he told me, if you really want to get to understand anti-Semitism, you have to read my brother-in-law, Rabbi Raphael Shore's book, Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Jew? I thought I understood it, but he said, no, you really want to understand it, you have to read his book. And I said, this is so serendipitous because our mutual friend, Ron Cardos, just told me you got to have him on your podcast. So I spent the last week, my friends, reading this book, getting way more clarity on this subject, but I'll tell you why it's important to understand this and why I really am excited to have Rabbi Shore on this podcast. And it is because when you really understand anti-Semitism, as I do at a much greater level after reading this book this last week, it brings tremendous clarity to our role as a Jew in this world and the gravity of our responsibility. By the time this podcast is over, my friends, you too will have much more clarity in these matters and a much greater sense of purpose and responsibility in your role in this world.
Welcome to the Shema Podcast, the podcast for the perplexed, where Torah insights, intertwined through personal stories, as well as interviews with leading Torah scholars, demonstrate the empowering qualities of Torah and mitzvot. For more great Torah learning through Torch, the Torah Outreach Center of Houston, go to torchweb.org. Now to the show.
Rabbi Shore, thank you so much for taking time out of your day and joining us on the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, Dan, and thank you for that beautiful introduction.
I want to begin, of course, with you talking about your background. And, we'll just start there, and I'll guide you if you leave anything out, because your career has been so amazing at your contributions you've made to Clay Israel. I want to make sure we at least touch on all that before we get to what motivated you to write this book, and then we can discuss the book in a little more depth.
Look, I don't want to give anti-Semitism too much credit. I will tell you the story of a pivotal moment, an anti-Semitic experience that I was a victim of. And it was fascinating, and it definitely had a profound impact on me. I'd like to think that somehow I would have made my journey back to Judaism without it. And more importantly, what you read in my book is the idea that when I went to study anti-Semitism, more than the experience of it, when I went to study it, starting at university, I came to an incredible insight that it is through the understanding of anti-Semitism that we can gain tremendous strength and inspiration and moral self-confidence as Jews. And I've kind of been sitting on that knowledge for 40 years because it's actually so deep. The information is so deep that in some ways I didn't think the world was ready to hear it. The understanding of anti-Semitism that I present in the book goes against the conventional wisdom that we've been raised on. And as we talked about earlier, there's been a lot of mistakes that have been inherent in Jewish education, fundamental errors. And the understanding of anti-Semitism is one of them. And I challenge it in my book because I believe that now the world is in a place that they can hear it. So having said that, I'll go back to my upbringing in a small town in Canada, London, Ontario. And it was a great place to grow up. And I'm saying that not just because my mom's in the other room listening, but it really was. I mean, the Jews were a very, very small minority. So I grew up in a non-Jewish world, and there was a handful of Jews. I think there was 20 out of 1,000 in my high school. But it was really nice. It was pleasant. There wasn't no sense of self-importance, no complications of the psyche, like when people grow up in New York. And we didn't think we had to, be the world's greatest of anything. We were just growing up and having a good time. And we were part of the Jewish milieu. And then in the last year of high school, our non-Jewish friends who we used to gather together and party with every single Friday and Saturday night, all of a sudden, one Friday night, completely unprovoked and completely out of the blue, declared that no Jews were allowed at the party as we arrived. The leader of the pact was actually my girlfriend's brother, and it was a shock to us, and we just didn't know what to do with that. In the end, we appealed to them. It's kind of pathetic, but we appealed. No, please let us in. But once in, the provocations continued, and that was my first and only fist fight that I've gotten into in my life, where I at least had enough moral self-confidence to take on my girlfriend's brother, who is the main provocateur. And we got in a fist fight. And
did he state why?
What?
Did he state
No,
why?
there was no reason. Just Jews, and just you Jews don't like you Jews. And so that was that. But at that point, we realized that we don't want to be amongst these people anymore, if they don't like us. So I switched schools soon after. I went to a different school for my last semester of high school. And then following that, went to Israel. So it did have a profound impact. I probably was going to Israel anyways prior to that, to go to kibbutz for a few months to volunteer on kibbutz. But my friend, my other very close Jewish friend, who I'm close with even until today, he said throughout high school, he was saying that these friends of ours deep down don't like Jews. And he even had several incidents that he had told me about. But I said, come on, you're exaggerating. They're not really anti-Semitic. I'm not buying it. But it turned out he was right and I was wrong. And it was astonishing because really there was nothing about us. We were just like everybody else in every way. We played hockey, we played football, we did school, and partied. Yeah, we were twice a year synagogue Jews, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But we had a strong Jewish identity. I went to Jewish camps and stuff. But anyway, so that was the beginning, and then soon after that, my twin brother Ephraim, he ended up when he was in Israel, he went to a different kibbutz, and he stumbled upon Eshet Torah while he was touring, and he's like, wow, he had no idea because we had such a lousy Hebrew school experience that we were quite convinced that Judaism's antiquated, irrelevant, pathetic, stupid, whatever word adjectives you want to use, but convinced us there was nothing into Judaism. So at age 18, he ended up being exposed to it again and said, wow, this is really interesting. It's sophisticated, it's intellectual, it's relevant, it's wisdom for living. So he connected. I then came 2 years later to save him from the cult, because that's how I and most of my friends and relatives understood what he was doing by becoming religious and studying in yeshiva. So I went 2 years later. I was 20 years old. I had prepared myself at university with all the other side. I was a secure atheist. I'd gotten A pluses in college papers, disproving God's existence. So it must be that there's no God. And I was shocked when I got there that there was a completely other side that I had not been exposed to at academia. And so it was great because I got turned on myself to being Jewish, and I'd already been turned on to Israel. And the result was, as soon as I graduated from university at age 21, I moved to Israel and started studying yeshiva, and I've been there for 40 years.
Wait a second. I thought you went to Israel to save your brother from the cult.
Yes, I did. And then I had 1 year of university to go. So I went back to finish college. And then as soon as I finished college, I returned to Israel
Beautiful.
after I failed so miserably in my mission.
Well, we have a very similar upbringing for sure and mindset. So we've gone the full gamut.
Yeah.
So tell me about your career. It's fascinating when I look at all the work that you have done from everything from it's really all sort of encompassing around this, not only anti-Semitism, but getting world governments to understand the nature of the enemy of people who embrace, Jew or non-Jew, the idea of compassion, kindness, equitability with the law, things of that nature, and who we are up against. Speak a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah. So my fortune was that I'd been exposed when I went to Jerusalem when I was 20. I was exposed to Eshet Torah and Rabbi Noah Weinberg. And Rabbi Noah Weinberg's philosophy was not only that Judaism is so magical and beautiful and relevant that every Jew can find a way to connect to it, but also that it had a lot of responsibilities that came with it. So the main focus of Eshet Torah in those days was, if it is so meaningful, if you have rediscovered Judaism, being Jewish and the importance of the Jewish people, that you have not only a responsibility to live personally more connected Jewishly, religiously, whatever, but also to help the Jewish people. And that resonated with me, that there was a responsibility, since I had come from that world and I had understood how misleading the Jewish education was for the great majority of my generation. So I felt, wow, now I know how beautiful Judaism and being part of the Jewish people is. I want to dedicate myself and my life to helping Jews reconnect. So I decided to study in yeshiva for about 5 years to become a rabbi, get smicha, and then to work for Eshet Torah, which was a fledgling entrepreneurial organization with a very grand vision. And it was a bunch of 20-year-old guys under the tutelage of Rabbi Weinberg, who basically set out to do some very ambitious things with no experience whatsoever. And we were encouraged, and thank God, had a lot of siyata d'shmaya, a lot of help from above. So we accomplished a lot of things, but that gave me a lot of responsibility at a young age. So I ended up being COO of Aish International for about 10 years. So I was involved. That was my main part. Discovery Seminar. I was the first educational director of the Jerusalem Fellowships Program. I was the educational director. We brought thousands of kids over to Israel to study Judaism, politics, Israel, on the Jerusalem Fellowships under the tutelage of Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan. Discovery, we had hundreds of thousands of people participated in the 3.5-day seminar that showed evidence for God and Torah. And so I was part of all these exciting things in Aish Torah. And then fast forwarding, when Rabbi Weinberg died about 15, 16 years ago, I decided that was the time for me to branch out. And a couple of projects that I had initiated just before the end of Aish Torah was the Clarion Project, where I was starting to make films about the threat of radical Islam. And once I realized I had some abilities to make films, we started to make films about Judaism in Israel, and I started the organization which became known as the Open Door Media. So I went on my own 15, 16 years ago and started these two organizations, one to fight the evil enemies of the Jewish people who also were threats to America. The idea was to educate America about the threats of radical Islam. And then on the other hand, a positive messaging about Judaism in Israel to try to turn on young Jews to what being Jewish is about, to continue in the Aish Torah tradition, but doing it independently using media and film. And thank God today, both organizations are doing very well.
And you have a new film right now as well that is out that you're promoting. Can you discuss that just a bit?
Yeah, so I had mentioned about the journey with anti-Semitism. And after I had those experiences and I went to university and I was getting turned on to being Jewish, I decided to spend my time in university studying anti-Semitism. And as I mentioned, I held on to those ideas. I did develop a seminar called Why the Jews that was used in Aish Torah, and Rabbi Ken Spiro, my brother-in-law, he has been teaching that for many years, and Rabbi Moti Berger, because I get bored with my own material quickly. So I develop it, and then other people teach it, and it's great. So I decided 3.5 years ago that the time was right to put these ideas down in a book. So I started writing a book, and I just published it. And it's called Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Jew? Learning to Love the Lessons of Jew Hatred. And it got published 2 months ago. But about a year ago, somebody who was one of my beta readers, one of my rabbis, Rabbi Shalom Schwartz, said, listen, you're a filmmaker. You've made 17 feature-length documentary films. Why not make another one about the subject that's in the book? And I said, because I have to fundraise. That's why I'm not doing it. So he said he would help. And so as a result, we undertook it. So the film that is based on the book has different context, but it's based on the book, came out also a couple months ago, and I've been going around. That's why I'm here now. I'm on tour showing the film and signing books for communities all over the country, Jewish and non-Jewish. The film is called Tragic Awakening, a new look at the oldest hatred. And the first thing I tell people is, because it doesn't sound very inspiring, I say, is this an inspiring look at anti-Semitism? The whole idea for me of exploring anti-Semitism is to get clarity on what it is to be Jewish, the mission of the Jewish people, and the incredibleness of the Jewish people through the eyes of anti-Semites. So that's the idea is to learn from it and jujitsu anti-Semitism into a positive force, because that's really what the messages are when we understand it deeply.
Amazing. So you were working on this 3 years ago, but October 7th did change things. I remember doing a podcast shortly after that. As tragic, and we were hurt and we were crying for the atrocities that happened. But I knew then this is going to change the trajectory of many Jews. Mm-hmm. It's going to change Israel, and it's going to make many people who were not affiliated with their Judaism wake up and want to embrace it more. And so your timing is perfect. I thought you started writing this after October 7th, the way it's written, but it sounds like that was just, those events just coincided from above to make Jewish people more open to the ideas that you're presenting.
Yes, and there's 100%, there's no question. And that's why we call the film Tragic Awakening, because it was a terrible, terrible tragedy. But for many Jews, it's been an awakening. And the ideas in the film and in the book are really an attempt to articulate what every Jew is wondering about, perhaps even feeling, but can't articulate because we haven't received the education. But there's a sense in most Jews today after October 7th, it's like, what the heck? You know, I think that's like, what the heck? I thought it was over. I thought, the Holocaust, that wasn't enough. Like we've been saying never again for the last 80 years. Did some people not get the memo? What's going on?
Right.
They're still trying to wipe us out. It's shocking. And then you have to ask why. And frankly, the conventional wisdom that we've been taught and raised with is completely unsatisfactory, leaves us flat. And more than that, is Prager and Toulouse say it's been de-Judaized. The Jewish mainstream conventional wisdom explanation for anti-Semitism is de-Judaized. What they mean by that is that they've taken the Jewish element out of it. They don't hate us because we're Jews. They hate us because they need a scapegoat. They need to blame somebody. We're in the wrong place at the wrong time. They're a little jealous because we have too much money. It's nothing really about us. And if it was someone else in that same situation, they would have gotten them too. And that is just nothing to do about being Jewish. And it doesn't make sense. It doesn't satisfy even the common sense test, because in every generation, we've been hated for every single possible explanation for hatred. In every generation, it's violent, it's genocidal, and it's explained in every way, in every opposite way, in every contradictory way. Too much money, not enough money, too much assimilation, not enough, some capitalist, communist, everything under the sun. So to accept it as such a superficial level as, that's what it is, they just need someone to blame, is really a disgrace. But this is how our generation has been educated.
Yeah, I will say that, 5 or 6 years ago, I took my family to the Holocaust Museum here. And it was so upsetting to see the level of ignorance of what caused the Holocaust, that the new program that they were touting to make sure the Holocaust does not happen again was an anti-bullying campaign. And I just walked out of there shaking my head like, you guys are just absolutely clueless. You just had all this money raised for this big, beautiful building, and you are absolutely clueless on what caused the Holocaust and what's going to prevent another one from happening.
Right. The way I get to the deeper reason for Jew hatred in the book and in the film is fascinating, because I say, I'm not going to tell you the reason. I'm going to listen to the anti-Semites and let them tell us why they hate Jews. And this is what we don't do very well. This is why we get so surprised on October 7th, because we don't listen very well to anti-Semites. I've been fighting radical Islamic nut jobs for 20 years and trying to alert the world to it, because I listened to them. I realized the peace process was not going to work because I listened to Arafat. For the Jewish people, and it's understandable, I spend time talking about this in the book too, it's understandable after being hated for 2,000 years straight that we suffer from self-delusion because of such a deep desire to be over with it already and to be loved and to be accepted, that we fall for the thinnest of smidgens of hope. And so that's what happens when Arafat says, oh, we'll make peace. We say, okay, and we start falling all over him and giving everything away. And we don't listen to the fact that he's telling the Arabs, don't worry, this is not real peace. This is a step towards destroying Israel. We hate them and we're going to kill them and we're going to take all of Israel. But all that was ignored by the politicians, the leaderships, the ADL, the people who are responsible for protecting the Jewish people and calling out the anti-Semitism. But thank God I have something in me that gets me to listen. And same thing over here. So who did we listen to? Who did I listen to? And I started listening to all the way from when I was in college, the greatest anti-Semite of all time, Adolf Hitler. And I studied his ideology and I expand upon it in the film and the book, because he had an incredibly well-articulated and consistent ideology. He called himself a rational anti-Semite. And he knew exactly why the Jews were his number one enemy. And it wasn't because he needed a scapegoat. It was because it was an ideological war, and the Jews were the main enemy in his ideological war. And so this is fascinating. And so I go into it in great depth and present that he understood that the Jews had brought ideas into the world of morality, of humanitarianism, of love, peace, and brotherhood. And his ideology was the opposite. And he realized it was a war of those two ideologies.
And what was his philosophy at the core?
At the core, Hitler wanted to remake humanity according to social Darwinistic principles, natural law. Natural law was understanding that humanity is part of the animal kingdom. And in nature, might makes right. Domination is what you do to subdue the weaker. Weaker species and weaker elements in a species die out. The result is natural selection, which enhances the animal kingdom, which provides an evolution, an increasing development in a positive way in the animal kingdom. So when you see one lion devouring, the gazelle, that's natural law. It's nothing immoral about it. That is the way the animal kingdom will develop. When social Darwinism came along in the mid-1800s, people understood that humanity follows the same law. This was a very popular ideology in Europe, and it didn't take long for people to understand, including Hitler, that therefore the opposite ideology is the one that says, no, mankind is different. Mankind is sanctified. Mankind has a soul and therefore should have equal rights, and we should be striving for brotherhood, and we should have the morality of helping the weak and help the poor, and visions of love and peace and brotherhood. And there were two colliding ideologies. And Hitler saw that the ideology which had become the core of Western civilization was Judeo-Christian, which was essentially Jewish ideas that had been brought into the world through Christianity. And the result was that most of humanity had bought into these ideas of love and peace and brotherhood and God and ethical monotheism. And he said, that's terrible. That's going to be the end of humanity. And so he said, I need to restart humanity. We need to do a reboot. And the only way the reboot's going to work is if we get rid of those ideologies. So he was going to get rid of Christianity. He was going to get rid of Bolshevism, communism, because that believed in peace on earth in theory. And most important, he had to get rid of Jews, because Jews were the ones who started it all, and the Jews who continue bringing it in, even when they're not religious, they bring it in secular ways like communism, because Hitler believed that it was part of the Jew. It was in the DNA of the Jew, and that's why genocide was necessary to commit against Jews, because he believed that every Jew, by nature of his soul, his race, his DNA, his spiritual DNA, was going to bring these ideas into the world that were going to destroy humanity. So Hitler was out to save humanity by destroying the Jews.
Because it was not just the Jews he wanted gone. He wanted the Christians gone. He wanted people with physical handicaps gone. He wanted anyone considered weak. However, his target was the Jew, because as you explain in the book, he recognized what we all need to recognize about ourselves, is that we are the portal of spirituality that feeds into the world for the rest of the humanity. And he knew that. If he cut us off, everything else that was influenced by us will eventually die off, correct?
Right. Yeah. So he understood, and that's why the Nazi youth song that you quoted earlier, that you heard from Ken Spiro, was, we're sick of Sinai, leave us alone, the Pope and the rabbi shall be gone. This is something that was understood. Now, not every German, even when they were anti-Semitic, understood the depth of the Nazi ideology, but the leadership understood that that it was an ideological war. So when Hitler met the Mufti of Jerusalem, the radical Islamic leader of the Palestinians in the 1920s, and when he came to meet his ally, Adolf Hitler, in 1941 in Berlin as a special guest of Adolf Hitler, Hitler told him to lock in his heart this understanding, this secret, and that is that World War II was not a war of Germany against England and Germany against Russia. It was Germany against the Jews. Everything else is illusion, because at its core, it's an ideological war. The British are still upholding Judeo-Christian values. The communists are bringing a new idea of Jewish humanitarian values. At the core, it's an ideological war between the Jews and Judaism, and therefore killing the Jews became critical. And I talk about this both in the book and the film. Therefore, even at the end of the war, when they had limited resources, they chose to use their resources to continue killing the Jews, even though it meant that their military victory was being sacrificed. That made sense. Again, rational anti-Semitism. It makes sense when you understand Hitler's ideology. When you don't understand Hitler's ideology, then that military decision, that bad military decision, is another piece of information that shows you that Hitler was an insane lunatic and I can ignore everything that he said. But in the book and the film, I'm saying, no, let's really understand what he said, because it reflects not just his anti-Semitism, but the anti-Semitism throughout the generations.
With that framework, I don't know if this fits into that framework. It probably does. But how do you make sense like today, where you have people in the, I always get the letters mixed up, LGBTQT, aligned with the pro-Palestinians in rallies? Where is that? Because you always see these weird groups coming together because of the common enemy of the Jew. But do you think they are consciously thinking we have to eradicate the source of all compassion and that everyone has human dignity and all those things? Where that still doesn't make any sense to me.
Right. No, for sure not. Even in the film, we bring a guy who says something that we hear commonly these days, a liberal, progressive guy. And he says, I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm just for human rights. I'm not against the Jews. I'm just against genocide. So today, anti-Semitism has morphed into anti-Israel. And whatever the society holds as the greatest value, always the Jews become the opposite and become the evil force in the world. So today, human rights is the greatest value of liberal progressives. And the Jews, not surprisingly, have been labeled as the grossest violators of it in humanity. And the Pope just said he's wondering whether we're doing genocide. The ICC says we're doing genocide. The professors on campus says we're doing genocide. And I say, let's look. If they're saying the Jews are committing genocide, it's either that they're ignorant because they don't know what genocide is or what's going on in the Middle East, or they're anti-Semitic. There's only those two choices. Maybe 20,000 Palestinian civilians have been killed in over a year in a war. And of course, it's terrible. Every civilian that dies is terrible. But it's in a war where the Palestinians specifically embedded themselves in order to have their own Palestinian civilians killed. It was the most morally deplorable war that humanity's seen since World War II. Israel's been more careful than any other army in human history. 20,000 people. There was 14,000 Jews killed every day in Auschwitz, and there was another 100 camps, at least, killing Jews, and 6 million Jews were killed. Genocide is trying to intentionally wipe out entire people. If the world cared so much about Palestinians, they should have let them out of Gaza instead of leaving them to be in a war zone. They let 5 million people out of Ukraine. They let 5 million people out of Syria because that's human rights. That's international law of the Geneva Convention. The world, Egypt, Europe, America, conspired to keep the Palestinians in and not let them out because it's Jews. They came up with a new moral principle saying, we can't displace people. Well, you do everywhere else when there's a war zone, but you don't. And then you can say we're committing genocide even when it's patently obvious that we're not in any definition of the word. And yet you see how much it's taken hold of. So the point is, this is the long-winded answer, that there is something deeply perverse in what's going on in the world. And so just like the reason they hated us was not because we killed Christ, and not because we didn't assimilate enough, and not because we have too much money, and not because we don't have enough money, and not because we smell or whatever else. It's also not because we are occupying the Palestinian territories. They hate us because we're Jews, and they come up with different excuses every year. And what's deep down bothering them is the moral burden that we are bringing into the world. Hitler had that clarity. Hitler articulated it. Most people don't. So they just come up with those excuses that are based on that society's morals. So if it's human rights, we're against Jews, and I feel good about it. I'm not an anti-Semite. Hitler also thought he was a good man. As I said, he was trying to save the world. He wasn't a bad guy. in his mind. So same thing here, the LGBTQ, in the most perverse way, because they would all be killed if they would go to Gaza, are supporting Gaza and supporting Hamas because deep down, we bother them. Deep down, the moral obligations of Sinai bothers them. And they're trying to change it. They're trying to change it. They've been trying to change it for 25, 30 years, the moral systems, and we're in the way.
So one of the things that this really helps a Jew understand, I mean, when you hear in the book, you're talking about, like you said, I want to hear what the anti-Semites are saying and why they hate us. And you read about a lot of these things, and it's you feel good about yourself.
Right.
That's right. That is what I stand for, right?
Right.
You know, what you hate me for is what I am proud to be, to bring moral clarity to the world around me. You know, and it really is emboldening to, you know, improve oneself in order to convey that message and convey, obviously, a responsibility in the world.
I'm glad you brought that up because, in other words, for me, that's the purpose of the film and the book. And I think it's a core message that we, the Jewish people, need to be articulating for the next generation, for Jews and non-Jews. And that is that Hitler was not incorrect. What do I mean by that? Because people don't like that. They don't like that. Hitler was not incorrect when he identified the Jews as the spiritual superpower of humanity. And he said, they are the number one enemy, not because we're a physical power, but because we're a spiritual superpower that have completely transformed the world with a new set of ideas based on humanitarianism, love, peace, God, and beauty of humanity and the potential of humanity. And Hitler said that he hates that so much, he wants to destroy it. And that has been the battle of humanity from Sinai. And that's why it says that at Sinai, hatred came into the world. The Gemara brings that down in Avodah Zorah. And this is the Jewish idea. So Hitler's understanding of anti-Semitism and the Torah's anti-Semitism idea of anti-Semitism is the same, that it's a fight against God. It's against a fight against morality that the Jews have brought into the world, the moral burden that humanity has to live with, because humanity is a body and a soul, and the body doesn't want to listen to the soul. And it's the same thing in human history. It's a struggle in every human life, and it's a struggle in every human nation, in every generation, in all of human history. And that struggle, God put the Jewish people in to be the soul that was going to be teaching the world. The body doesn't like that. Anti-Semites don't like it, and they're pushing back. That resistance is called anti-Semitism. But if we understand it, as you say, that should give us such strength, such pride and pleasure in understanding the privilege to be part of a people that have actually transformed the world. Like, flip this on its head, flip it on its head. Hitler was right, and this is what I do in the book. I spell it out very deeply. The Jewish impact from day one, not just the technological stuff and the medical stuff and the science and the Nobel Prizes, which is all awesome and completely beyond our numbers, but and not only just psychology and all the movements, social movements, but the ethics of the Judeo-Christian foundation that come from Judaism that have completely transformed the world. It is so amazing to be part of this people who are good, who are dedicated to making the world a better place in every generation. And we should just sit back and say, wow, it's awesome to be Jewish. And after 2,000 years of being persecuted, that's very difficult. Our moral self-confidence, our self-esteem has been battered, understandably, like a battered wife. We're just smashed around, and it's very hard for us to sit back and say, yeah, it's great. But that's how I look at it. I see anti-Semitism, and I say, you got a problem, but thank you very much for recognizing me, evil. Evil recognizes good, and evil comes after good in every generation, and evil finds the Jews in every generation. And I say, what a compliment. I love being Jewish, and I'll keep fighting for these ideas.
You know, I think that's why a lot of Jews don't understand this, is because, like Hitler said, we innately, in our DNA, a Jew can be totally non-religious, brought up like us, where we thought it was just nonsense and have a Passover Seder and go to shul once or twice a year begrudgingly. But we innately know, in our desire to be a good person, and our ideal of a good person is to be someone that stands up for the weak, that it brings fairness and justice to all. And I think that's why Jews automatically assume that everyone thinks that way.
So Jews have those two issues. On the one hand, we naively believe that everybody has the same inclinations as we do, which is a tremendous drive and love for peace and justice and helping people. And unfortunately, not all of humanity is like that. And there is evil and there are enemies. And secondly, we have a tremendous problem thinking of ourselves as exceptional in some way. And so it's the flip side of the same coin, really, is to see there is something very special and unique about being Jewish. And it doesn't mean that we have to be arrogant about it. We shouldn't be arrogant about it. But when you're a hockey player, I'm Canadian, so bring the hockey parable. So when you're a hockey player, you're very happy that the coach put you on the first line and center. And, that's it. Okay. So, if you're good at that and that's your talent and that's your responsibility, that's the role you play. Still team sport. We still need everybody in humanity to play their role and get better and be skilled. And we ourselves need to get better. And we certainly have our share of scoundrels and bad people. So we're not even saying that we're behaving better. What we are saying is that God established us as messengers for this message to be brought into the world. And at times we've done better than others at bringing it in. Really, we've done a good job because we're still holding on despite 2,000 years of anti-Semitism. And the greatest response that we can make as Jews today is to respond to the spiritual moral force of anti-Semitism with a positive spiritual response of saying, it's great to be Jewish. They hate me because I'm Jewish. I'm going to love being Jewish. I'm going to be more Jewish. And that's what I do. At the end of the book, I bring a dozen or so personal stories of people, Jews and non-Jews, who have responded to the anti-Semitism, especially post-October 7th, with inspiring and very human responses to be better, to be more connected, to stand up for Israel, stand up for being Jewish, or even in their personal lives to be more observant. And that is the correct response. We're not going to necessarily end anti-Semitism, but what we can do is embrace being Jewish. I believe that will reduce the power of the anti-Semites.
Beautifully said. A lot of Jews have an issue with the chosen people for this very reason, because also at the heart of a Jew is a sense of humility. That's in our spiritual DNA as well. And the idea of being a chosen people, we shirk it off like it's a sense of entitlement. We don't want that. Instead of what you lay out in your book is, no, it's a responsibility. And when you understand you have this responsibility to reflect the higher ideals that our Creator has for mankind, then what that means is, like we say all the time too, like you want to do a Kiddush Hashem. You want to make sure that you are projecting yourself in the world in the most refined manner possible. And I think if Jews would understand that it's the idea of a chosen people, it might change their mindset and they might embrace their Judaism in more outwardly fashion as a result.
Yeah, it's possible. And at the same time, Jews really do have a problem saying it. And I'm sensitive in the book. I talk about our role. I talk about what Hitler understood our role to be, and what anti-Semites said, and philo-Semites who see the same phenomena of Jewish impact, but embrace us and like us. You don't have to be anti-Semitic just because you see Jewish impact. But at the same time, the Jewish people really do have a problem with uttering those words, chosen people. So in the book and the film, I'm very careful to couch it carefully. And then I've presented, it's humorous. I've presented the film several times in the last couple of months to Christian groups, and they come out of it loving it. And similarly, everyone who's been watching it has been deeply impacted and saying that they want to make sure everyone they know sees this. And that's a wonderful compliment. But the Christians always say, why didn't you say it more clearly? Why didn't you say it straight on the head? You're the chosen people. They hate you for being the chosen people. And I say, because Jews won't listen. Jews won't hear it. Yeah.
I've been at Passover Seders back in my younger years where half the people there were Christian, half were Jewish. And I would tell people only half believed that the story we were about to tell, and the half that believed it were the Christians. Because for a Jew to accept the truth of the Exodus from Egypt and receiving the Torah comes with a whole host of responsibilities. The Christian says it's
613.
true. You just go on with your day the way you had before. So
Right. Because in
it's a tough
Christianity,
struggle.
it's about having faith. So if they have faith, they're good to go. In Judaism, you have to accept a lot of moral responsibility in the mitzvot. So it's a whole different proposition. And as a result, it's very difficult for Jews to accept the assumption. If there were no consequences to the assumption, it would be easier. And you're right. That's why Christians very often are more easily accepted. We used to see when I was at Asia Torah, some people traveling together would come to visit Asia Torah, and it was a mixed group. It was always the Christians who were much more animated and excited about hearing the ideas for the first time. They say, "Wow, this is awesome! This is such wisdom! This is incredible! Wow!" And the Jews say, "Oh no, I know where this is heading. I know where this is heading. I'm not going to get excited about any of these ideas because I know the responsibilities are right behind."
Right, exactly. We were chosen because we are stiff-necked people, which makes us harder to be sold. But once we're in, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. In the end of the day, it is so remarkable that the Jewish people were given this mission, and 2,000 years later, after being beaten up, I went to Italy a little while ago. I went to Venice, where the first ghetto, the word ghetto comes from, where the Jews were put in Venice, and the ghettos were all over Europe where the Jews were. But it wasn't like for 10 years or 20 years. It was for 400 years. For 400 years, Jews were in ghettos. They couldn't come out, except for certain hours of the day. They couldn't have professions. And that was just a piece of history. There was the Inquisition and the exiles from every single country in the planet. And the fact that we have been able to hold on and be in Israel today, we're like the top 5 happiest peoples in the world, even as we're facing wars and challenges, et cetera. It's just a remarkable story of resilience. And you're right, that's the positive side of our stiff-neckedness. And I think when God looks down and sees what's going on with the Jewish people, he's got to be impressed with our ability to stick with him, even after all this long journey. And even though many Jews in every generation slip away and lose the plot line, so many of us have held on to it, and so many more people are open to it. And again, that's why I think my book and the film in this generation and this year has a lot of resonance for people, and I'm hoping people will have the opportunity to read it and watch it.
Well, yes, I'm going to put a link in the show notes for all. As Rabbi Ken Spiro said to me, it's a must read. I'm going to echo that to you now that I've actually read it over this last week. It is a must read. You need to understand this at its core. You need to make sure that your children understand this because, again, in the end, it is very empowering. How can someone go about watching your film, Tragic Awakening?
The trailer is on YouTube, Tragic Awakening. There's a website, tragicawakening.com, or they can get it and the book from raphaelshore.com. The book's available also on Amazon. And they can go to the website and find out when screenings are happening. And also they can sign up, and we will let them know when we're doing online screenings. Because once a month or so, we're going to do free online screenings. We had 1,200 people signed up for one we did 2 weeks ago. And then we're going to film. Right now, we're doing screenings in communities. We're going to film festivals. We're doing major events. We're doing conferences. If somebody would like to organize an event in a community for their church or their synagogue, they can get in touch with us also through the website, raphaelshore.com with a PH. And they could reach out to us and we can help them organize a screening. There's a small license fee. That's how the film will be available for the coming months. And that's why I'm traveling all over the country. And come March or so, we will make it available for free on a platform for everybody to watch even more easily.
I will put that link in the show notes as well. Rabbi, is there anything else you want to add to this discussion?
Well, I'm inspired by your story, Dan. And I think, like you started off with, is that I think that this information and these ideas are so fundamental to what it means to be Jewish. And that's the core idea. Through anti-Semitism, we can learn what it means to be Jewish. And it's very positive and very inspirational. And so rather than being beaten down by it psychologically, we can gain empowerment. And I'm very hopeful and optimistic that many people who are wondering, like we said also at the beginning, when everyone's wondering today what's going on, well, we have here answers that can really help everybody get clarity and empowerment. So I'm hoping that people will take advantage, and I'm available if anyone has questions about it.
Beautifully said. I think you wrapped up everything the way it should be. I'm delighted that you came on. Again, the book changed my perspective on so many things. I'm grateful that you wrote it. I am looking forward to watching your film and appreciate everything you're doing for the Jewish people.
Thank you so much. A pleasure to be on your show, and you should have lots of luck in the future too.
Thank you, Rabbi.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting Torch so they can continue to spread Torah wisdom to the world by making a donation at torchweb.org and clicking donate in the top right corner of the page.